Hi everyone, my name is Angie Background. I am the founder of Leg Up Legal. We provide a mentoring program that connects prospective law students to lawyers for mentoring. We started hosting these weekly meetups so that students would have a chance to meet each other and feel like they weren't alone in going through this crazy struggle that is the coronavirus law school admissions time period. So we started bringing in guest speakers every week to talk to you guys about different topics that might help you guys navigate law school and the legal profession. So today I am joined by a very special guest. Her name is Lisa Goldkuhl, and she is an attorney that is in-house at a state legislature. And she also happens to write fiction. So Lisa's going to tell us today a little bit about her journey and how she started writing and why she thinks that writing fiction makes her a better writer as a lawyer. So Lisa, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, thank you so much, Angie, for having me. So I am, as Angie said, an attorney for in-house counsel. I've worked for the state of California for 23 years. So I started with the Attorney General's office when I was 23. I went to law school because it seemed much more profitable than becoming a professional writer. That really wasn't my parents' dream for me to become a fiction writer. So it's sort of like, oh, you can have that as a hobby, but have a real job in the meantime. And, if you have Asian parents, you know how that's like. Writing is not considered a real job. So you can be a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, or an engineer. Those are the sort of four really acceptable. Maybe business, that's 5. So I went into working for the Attorney General's office when I was 23, went straight through from college to law school and then to working in civil rights defense, defending the Department of Corrections from inmate civil rights cases, which was also not my dream job, but I wanted to work for the Attorney General's office. I hadn't wanted to do litigation. I will say for anyone who has the chance to do a bit of litigation, it's a great experience. Whether you think you'll like it or not, I actually liked it a lot more than I thought I would. And it really rounded me out, I think, as a practitioner. I don't think I'd be the practitioner I am. And that's what I'm going to talk a lot about today, is sort of that idea of being well-rounded and how important I've come to believe that is versus being highly specialized and just in your tiny, tiny niche area and thinking if you stay there, you'll become the ultimate master of that area. So after 3 years, I ended up leaving there and going to work for the state legislature as their in-house counsel. Currently, what I do is I've been a supervisor for about 9 years in opinion writing. So we have a branch where we write legal opinions on every single subject, which is a little unusual that attorneys, as an attorney, you would have the chance or the opportunity to work in every subject. I have to admit, when they offered me the position, I wasn't sure I thought it was an opportunity because I'd worked in specialized areas, which is how our office had previously been set up. And then they created a branch called the opinions branch, which was going to suddenly do all the opinions. Previously, the subject matter specialists who had drafted legislation in an area would write opinions for that particular area. And now they decided we're going to have just an opinions branch, and they're going to do opinions in every single area. So it could be, federal constitutional law, it could be local zoning and ordinance, it could be criminal law, it could be tax law, it really could be anything. And there was a lot of trepidation, including for myself, with this idea of, well, how is that going to work? How can I possibly learn well enough to write a 10 or 15 page opinion on any particular area of the law, especially if it's one I've never worked in before? And what we found, interestingly, and this is where I just sort of started expanding my horizons, was that actually you can learn and you can continue to learn. And the more you learn in different areas, actually the better you get at learning. And so what we've found is our generalists who are in the opinions branch can actually pick up most areas pretty quickly. There's a couple that are real difficult to pick up, some of the federal income tax, but almost every other subject of law you can really pick up in a couple weeks of intense focus on a question and really get it done well. And we do consult with our subject matter specialists, but again, we've sort of found that once you start learning is a real skill that's different than a specialization. And it's almost the most important skill as an attorney. So one of the things I did was I kind of wrote fiction on and off for years, but having a huge fear of failure and not being good at things, I never submitted anything. So I would write part of a novel, I'd write some short stories, they would sit getting dusty. And then this year, I simultaneously kind of picked up 2 new hobbies, which is I started on LinkedIn, and I was really inspired by like Alex Sue and Claire Parsons. I started writing regularly every day on LinkedIn, and I joined a fiction writers group that has a couple professional writers in it. I happened to just run across them by chance. I was at a field trip for my son at this place called Sutter's Fort, which is super old-timey, and like the 1840s, 1860s era, I think. So I had to go learn to be a volunteer and learn to weave because I was going to be working there for my son's overnight trip, and I had to learn to weave so I could show the kids how to weave, and then if anyone else came into the state park, show them how weaving was done. And one of the ladies there who was teaching us how to weave on a loom, she happened to mention she was in a writer's group, and I said, oh, what kind of writing does it do? She said, oh, it's the Warp Spacers. We do science fiction fantasy, which is what I've always written, or mystery. Those are my two areas. And I said, do you have any room in your group? And she said, yeah, we'd love to have, she said, we have a professional writer. And I'm always a little skeptical. So I'm kind of like, okay, you got a professional writer, whatever, probably, maybe. And then she's like, yeah, he's published 40 books. I'm like, oh, and he's actually one who appears at the Barnes and Nobles and at the local bookstore, and he quit his job as a veterinarian to become a professional writer. And I thought, this sounds like a pretty good writers group if he started there as an amateur and then became a professional. And she said, we're doing an anthology, and we've published a couple volumes of an anthology of short stories. And I said, okay. So I joined the group, and what I found, and this is, I think, like I said, interesting, because I used to really believe in hyper specialization. So I read Angela Duckworth's book on grit, and I won't say I was devastated when I read it, but grit is this thing that if you really focus heavily on one area, you can excel, and sort of the 10,000 hours from Outliers from Malcolm Gladwell, this idea. And I thought, gosh, I don't think I have grit. I don't think I have much grit. I feel that's not one of my areas. I have a lot of talent, but grit, if you can't finish a novel, grit may not be your strong suit. So I took Angela Duckworth's quiz about grit. She has a test online you can take, and it said, you have more grit than 10% of American adults who finish this test. So it was like, oh, I'm in the bottom 10%, basically. I'm like 90% of people have more grit than me. I consoled myself by saying, well, it's of people who finished, and probably there's people without grit who haven't finished. So, maybe it's more than all American adults. But that was hard. So I spent a lot of time then working on kind of grit. How can I improve my grit? And one of the things was, I knew I'd scored low on the test because I jump around a lot. I like to do art. I take painting classes. I do this and that. I don't finish. But then I read the book Range, which it's called book Range, Why Generalists Triumph in a World of Specialization. And a colleague had recommended it to me, and it was kind of life-changing for me. I think it's by an author named David Epstein. And the reason it was life-changing is because it affirmed everything I'd found supervising the opinions branch and sort of everything I'd been seeing, which is that, yeah, you do need to have focus, but diversity of experience makes a huge difference. And actually, even for specialization, one of the theories of that book is there's two kinds of environment. There's a wicked environment and there's a kind environment. I believe it's called a kind environment. And the kind environment is like golf or chess, where it has very definite rules. And those rules, if you just practice and practice and practice, minute changes in your own technique will make you an expert. But in a wicked environment, it's constantly changing. So that in most of our work environments are a wicked environment. So you get used to flexibility, adaptation, and that sort of thing. And that actually helps you a lot of times with analogical thinking. So one of the examples he gave in the book that I loved was, he said, okay, when you ask people, here's one problem, radiation, you need to treat a cancer tumor, but the amount of radiation you send through any part of the body will give that part of the body the same amount of radiation as the tumor, which is functionally to kill it. How would you treat that tumor with radiation, knowing that when you send it through, it's going to kill the cells that it's going through equally? And then he said, but give someone another problem then. Let's say you give them a story. There's a guy who needs to attack a castle. The castle's surrounded by minefields. You can only send but a number of roads. You can only send one person in through each road to attack. How would you attack the castle? You would attack it by sending one person on each road. So let's say you have 500 roads into the castle, you would attack it from different directions. He said, once you give people that analogy, even though they're two completely different areas, battle and treatment of medical treatment, people then recognize, oh, the way that you can treat cancer is to send the radiation in from different sides. so that you don't actually kill any of the cells on one given side. It just gets to the tumor in the middle and kills the middle. So the idea is the more diversity of experience you have, the more analogical thinking you can do in application. And so one of the things I've learned, particularly because I've been thinking about this a lot, what kind of hobbies should you have to be a better lawyer? And I would actually say whatever hobby you love and will put time into, that is the hobby you want to have. And the book Range, one of the things he said was most Nobel Prize winners have hobbies in creative areas. And you see that even in the law. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg, for example, and Antonin Scalia were both huge fans of the opera, and they actually appeared in an operatic performance as amateurs. So obviously that was something they loved doing. And these are real heavyweights. I looked up Thurgood Marshall to see what diversity of experience he had, because for example, one of the cases he argued, he brought in a lot of psychological data, which I thought was really interesting because it wasn't something that had been traditionally done. And they said he had worked in a health clinic at nights. And I have to believe that this diversity of experience informs how you practice. So to give you an example, if you view law as a very rigid environment with rigid rules, it's not. The law is always changing. And one thing I tell my attorneys, because they're often looking for the right answer, because we give opinions and they're nonpartisan and whatever, but I say there's not a right answer. There's a better answer at any given time, and that answer may change. And the example my husband often gives, and this is just as a practitioner to understand your role and that there's not a right answer. It's a complete social construct, the law. The attorneys who went in to argue Brown versus Board of Education, which is the great desegregation decision for schools, they went in with the law being smack against them. They had Plessy versus Ferguson, which said separate but equal was fine. They nevertheless went in and argued in a different way. They used, again, psychological data that probably hadn't been presented to the court, I would suspect, in Plessy versus Ferguson. They didn't just argue the law. They argued a lot of policy to support their legal theory. And that was a different way of looking at it. And if they had viewed law purely as a specialist and said, well, the ruling precedent in the land is Plessy versus Ferguson, they wouldn't have thought that hard and they would have never come up with new theories. And so I think as a lawyer, having that ability to problem solve and be creative, if you want to be exceptional, is really, really important, and think outside the box. And
I love that you're saying that, Lisa, because I think a lot of young students, as they get into law school, that's one of the things that they do is they're always looking for the right answer. You think there's just one right answer that you're trying to get to. And, but I think most lawyers, we know, and you'll hear this a million times in law school, that most of the time the answer is, it depends. So they'll be able to argue lots of different positions. And, the right answer may change depending on, what day it is or what time it is or what situation is before you. So I love that you're saying those things. I also really, really like how you're talking about having other passions, outside of the law, and how that informs the way you practice law. Because I think a lot of people think, okay, well, I'm going to get into the law and all I'm going to do is work. And that will make me a better lawyer. But I think most lawyers eventually come to understand, like you, that you have to have other passions in your life. You have to make time for other things in your life. And that'll actually broaden your horizons as to your experiences so that you can practice law better. So I love all of this advice that you're giving people. I also dropped the links for the 2 books that you had mentioned into the chat box. So if anyone's interested in the books that she mentioned, Grit by Angela Duckworth and Range, both of the links are in the chat. So, but please continue.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. We do, especially as young lawyers, get very caught up in this idea of the right answer. And the reason I love the Brown versus Board of Education example is because A, it shows that that the answer can change, and B, it shows that you can change the answer and influence it. But you have to do it by thinking differently than the lawyers who went before you. If they'd gone forward with the same case from Plessy versus Ferguson that was presented and lost, they wouldn't have had a different result. And so that's where really thinking in a different way is better. And you can't think in a different way if you're surrounded by the same people and in a tiny, tiny discrete area. That's just not how the brain works. I will say, I'm not slamming grit at all. I think there is a place for grit, and certainly it's something I'm working on. But when I read Grit more closely after reading Range, one of the things that came out at me was actually she mentions a lot switching and finding what you have a passion for. So there's a lot of having grit as in sticking with something for a year or two, and then if it's not for you, switch to something else that is for you. So you don't just pick something and say, to have grit, I need to stick with this for the rest of my life. It's not a marriage. It's a trial period, and then if you find something, then you can stick with that longer. And I think the reality is if you have a passion for it, you will stick with it longer. So for me personally, I'm fortunate. My two passions, and I don't think they have to be directly related to writing, but writing is a really important thing, both as a lawyer and a non-lawyer. It's just one of those great communication skills you can have. And whether you're a litigator or a non-trial transactional lawyer, or whether you're just a salesperson, being able to write compellingly, convincingly is really important. And one of the things I realized as I was going on LinkedIn and as I joined this fiction writers group with these people who would give me feedback was that even though I'm 46 and have written for a long time and am considered one of the best writers at my office, and I consider myself a very good writer, I was getting tips that were helping me become a better writer because lawyers tend to write a certain way. We want to write, and I especially found this when I was young, I wanted to sound smart. Part of my goal, I wanted to win, but I wanted to sound smart and I wanted them to know I was smart. And that was what I was trying to prove. And it took me a few years of doing litigation to realize the most compelling thing you can do is write something so simply that no other conclusion can be reached. If you write an issue and make it look so simple that the conclusion is obvious, you may not look smart, but you will win that case. And that is a skill. And so one of the things when I went into my fiction writers group, the first thing they said to me was, you write like a lawyer. And what they meant was my sentences were very long. I had a lot of passive voice, this and that. And so it really was like a kick in the pants of like, oh, I've gotten lazy. I haven't, and partly because I haven't been doing litigation, I've been writing legal opinions, which tend to be kind of, a little, and I do try to write for my audience. But when you write fiction, you learn to really write for your audience. You are not writing for yourself. I mean, you're partly writing for yourself, for your passion, but if you can't communicate the idea of the story, you're sort of wasting your time. So you really, really learn, and that feedback is very important. And one thing I will say for anyone in the legal industry, you will get very little feedback. It is unusual to have a supervisor or boss who will be giving you sort of an intensity of feedback like hey, the structure's wrong. Because I edit for 7 attorneys. So I edit their work. I'm constantly going through. I'm one of the few supervisors, I think one of the only ones at my office, who actually goes through and I do a deep dive. I try to do it once or twice a year and actually go through when I rearrange and say, I reorganized this because the flow wasn't good. Here's why I changed this word. Here's why I changed that. That is unusual. I've never gotten that from any supervisor I've had. I've had to learn myself through trial and error, and they'll correct things, and then I have to try to go through and figure out what they thought wasn't as good. But if you're in a writer's group, you learn that quickly. And so my posts on LinkedIn are the same thing. They got to be short. They got to be concise. I often take one sentence and cut it into 2 sentences. And you really get instantaneous feedback. Do people respond? Do they not? Am I connecting with people? And as an attorney, you need to connect with a judge when you're writing. Or if you're speaking with a jury, you need to connect with them. That is your job. It's not to look smart. It's not to do anything else but to connect and make your point and be persuasive. And so feedback is really, really important and being open to that. So I've found fiction writing and like I said, my LinkedIn writing, but particularly with fiction, because they will give criticism. And they said, are you open to feedback? I said, I am. That's one of the things I think I'm best at taking. I may not have grit, but I can take a lot of feedback. And that's been really helpful. So if you can find people who will give you feedback, and sometimes that's in different areas. So I also wanted to point out, mine happened to be writing, which is really great because it's compatible with what I'm doing. So the writing does translate. But I think even if you have a passion that's different, that can help because it helps you think about things in different ways. So one study I saw, they had a bunch of ophthalmology students, which was medical students for being eye doctors. They gave one group, ran one group through just, whatever, normal medical school. The other group, for a year, they made them take an art history class. What they found after the year was that students who'd taken the art history class were better diagnosticians than the ones who hadn't. Well, that seems weird. It's an unrelated topic. Why would they be better? But any passion you have, there are nuances, there's flow that you'll see, there's congruence, and there are applications. You may not immediately be able to identify them, But for example, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Schrodinger's cat, that experience. I've never really understood the Schrodinger's cat physicist thing about, is there a cat if he's in the box and you don't know if he's alive? Is he alive or is he dead? Maybe he's alive and dead simultaneously. It's some physics theory that I've never been good at. But he's considered brilliant. His hobby was making tiny doll houses. And he would make tiny blankets on a tiny loom for the dollhouse. That seems like a weird thing, but I suspect somehow that putting together of that dollhouse not only fueled his passion, but also there probably was some analogical thinking with the structure and doing the architecture for the tiny dollhouse. So if you have a passion and you pursue it, I don't know that you even have to think about how it applies to your legal practice or whatever else you're doing, but that well-rounded diversity applies to your life. And I'm gonna just give one more story, I think, before we open it up to questions and maybe people talking about their passions. But one of the things I thought was so interesting was they created, in Range, he talks about, they created this website. And the website was for non-specialists to solve world problems that had been kicked around by the specialists and they couldn't solve. So one of the problems, I don't remember what it was, but it was a problem NASA had for 30 years and somebody on the website solved it who was not working at NASA. And one of the issues they had was that when they were cleaning up oil spills, when they would get the oil from the ocean into the tankers, once it was in the tanker, it would get glued up in the hold and they couldn't get it out. So they were looking at all these chemical solutions. What can we add to the oil to break it up so we can get it out, because it's getting stuck in there and we can't get it out. They posted on the board. 6 months later, a guy gave them an answer that worked. I think he was an engineer, but he didn't come up with it through engineering. He had worked construction, and he'd worked construction like for a summer, the summer job. He helped a friend building a dock that was down this big slope. So to get the concrete down to the dock, they had this like a slide thing where the concrete went down there. Now it was hot sun, so to keep the concrete from gluing together or getting too compact, they had this, and you probably may have seen them. It's a device where it's kind of like a wand. You put it in there and it vibrates and shakes it up to keep it from ever connecting too much, so it stays fluid, relatively fluid, so it could go down the hill. He came up with an idea for that. He said you could actually mechanically vibrate the oil to separate it and get it out of there. And it was a really simple fix that no one had thought of. He happened to have this weird experience that he came up with. He wasn't a specialist. And that was really inspiring to me, of like, that's analogical thinking. And I really think for lawyers in particular, but for almost any problem solving aspect, analogical thinking, diversity of experience is key to being really good at it. You can be good at something, but I don't think you're going to be exceptional unless you have some other passions. So that's just my personal view. And it's self-serving because I love fiction writing.
I completely agree, Lisa. Thank you so much for that. I did have one thought. So you had mentioned, you're probably not going to get a lot of feedback as a lawyer. I absolutely think that that's true. If you have bosses that give you a lot of feedback, cherish them because usually you won't have a boss that'll take the time to go through your writing with you. So do you have any tips on how students or young lawyers can ask for feedback if they want some critiques on their writing or work product? How can they go about finding it?
I think, as you said, the biggest thing is really to ask and engage the person. And it's hard to do sometimes because it feels like an ask and it's also hard. So I remember my first trial I went through, and my first boss was fantastic about just sort of holding my hand through every step. He sat through my first trial with me. He sat through my first hearing with me. He sat through my first depo with me. He was great. And that's really, really rare. I found out later. But I actually asked him after my trial. I won it and it was pretty fast, but I knew I hadn't been perfect. I had a very good case. And I said to him, what would your suggestions be? And it's kind of hard to ask that. I said, what would your feedback be? I want to do better next time. And a lot of times if people know you want to do better, they are really willing to help if they have the time, even if it's sometimes a little more work for them. And so in that case, he said, you need to slow down and speak at about half speed, which I'm still working on. It's not my strength speaking or doing anything slowly. But I would say asking, and it's the same for me. If I have attorneys who really tell me I want feedback, and I will tell you, sometimes part of my instinct is, oof, that's a lot of work. And I have known people who actually don't want to give feedback at all. One of the supervisors at my office I remember talking to, and his theory was that people just develop organically. They just develop organically, and strong people, they don't need any feedback. They shouldn't need it. Maybe you give it to weak performers. And I said, if anything, you're depriving your strong performers. They, if anything, deserve the feedback. And that's what I found. One year I had a couple people that I was really working with, and I found my stronger people I neglected. And I had to apologize at the end of the year and say to one of my people, you know what, I could have brought you a lot further, but I really neglected you because you were very easy to supervise, and I didn't spend time with you. And so the next year I said, I promise I'll do better next time. And again, it is a lot of work, but I think if you, in a very genuine way, say, I really want to get better, I really respect your view on this. If you have some time, and I appreciate you're busy, so maybe you don't, but if you have some time, could you work with me on this? Could you review this? Could you explain why your comments or why you changed this? In particular, if you see something on a draft someone's changed, say, if you could explain this to me, because I want to know for next time so I can really improve my writing.
Thank you so much. That's a great answer. All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and open it up to the Q&A if you're ready. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask Lisa, or feel free to type them in the chat box and we'll try to get to them.
Yeah, and also if you have any passions you want to tell me about, I'd love to hear about that, because I love hearing about other people, what they're doing. So I don't feel so alone, like I'm neglecting my legal practice with my hours of fiction writing.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. That was really cool, and a lot, like in just a little bit of time. One question I had, kind of a practical question, is what types of writing other than fiction would you recommend kind of trying? Are there some that are like different genres that are maybe like easier or harder, like, or better for like an intro or entry level person who's trying to get into writing but doesn't know exactly where to start?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Charlie. Thank you for being here. I think any kind of writing will help. So for me, a real easy way, if you're on LinkedIn, would be to do LinkedIn posts and just sort of see the response, because they're very short. I think they're like 1,200 maximum characters. So I'm constantly like having to cut myself, like, oh, which also tells me I'm overly wordy. If you can't say in 1,200 words, maybe you shouldn't be saying it.
Right.
Also articles. So I'm starting to try to write articles is another thing. And one thing I've done is I've sent them to a couple people on LinkedIn who write articles and say, would you mind looking over this and giving me your thoughts? And just unsolicited people have been very kind about that. So that's one way. But I would try what you're interested in or what you read. So for me, and this is what I would say with fiction. Fiction can be really tough. So short stories is a little easier, which is why I like to do a lot more short stories, because they're more compact. Screenwriting is actually one I've done, which I like, because it's about 90 pages of compact if you're doing one film. And it's the formatting actually makes it much shorter. And screenwriting is a great way to learn to like economize with your words, because every scene has to do like 2 or 3 things. So you don't have luxury when you're writing a screenplay. It's like, if that scene is not forwarding character development and forwarding the plot, that scene's probably a waste of time, and you need to be doing more. And then for fiction writing, I will say one reason I like fantasy and sci-fi is because it feels easy. Like fantasy, just make up the rules you want. You can just make it up. You don't have to research. What I'm finding is the problem is you have to make up, it's almost harder than researching, because you have to make up so much stuff. It's like, what's the political system?
Right.
What's the magic system? So as I'm writing, I'm finding people will ask me questions in my group, well, what's going to happen with this? And I'm like, that's a great question. I don't know. What is going to happen? Let me think about that. And they're like, what were you planning with this? I'm like, I was kind of going by the seat of my pants, but I will come up with a plan by the next 2-week meeting. I will have that sorted out. So yeah, I would just try a bunch of different things and find what resonates.
Cool.
And in any writing, what you're going to find is any kind of writing you do, there will be an organizational component, there will be a flow component, and then there will be a wording component. So all of them will be a sort of problem solving and help you in some way when you do it.
Okay, cool. Thanks. One quick follow-up I had was, and I think this relates a little bit to like, I guess the dichotomy between like, say, fiction and writing like a research article. In fiction, and kind of on the subject of fearing not being original, I would say I definitely struggle with that. If I'm going to sit down and write, I want to say to myself, or I tend to say to myself, man, I really want to write something that no one else has written about, or I want to say it in a way that no one else has said, so that either someone doesn't accuse me of plagiarism, or so it adds value to the conversation. And so I was just wondering if you had any advice for kind of pushing through that, and maybe taking a look at times when it's valid and you really need to listen to that, or when times when you need to just say no to those thoughts and just like kind of go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great one, because I certainly have been derivative, especially when I started. what my writing was would change based on what I'd recently written. The tone, you know. In fact, actually, as I was reading through my fantasy novel I'm writing right now, I went back and read the original inspiration for it, which had kind of made me think about it. I read it and I was like, oh my God, the name of the goddess is Lasura in mine and it's Lashima in the other ones. This is super derivative.
Yeah.
What I found over time is actually being derivative isn't a bad thing if you keep your own voice. So the most important thing is that you have your own voice, but realistically, everything is derivative on some level. Right. And so even I wrote a short story that I submitted, and somebody said to me on it, it was a professional writer, the one who'd written like 40 books. He said, wow, this reminds me a lot of Orson Scott Card. And I remember thinking, because I wrote it like 20 years ago, yeah, that was inspired by Orson Scott Card. And then I had to say, that was a compliment actually, because his point was it really makes you think. And he didn't say it was exactly like, he didn't say, you know, and so what I'm starting to realize is even the professional writers, yeah, we have themes we like, and those are what resonate. So being derivative isn't a bad thing. You know, if you, West Side Story was a derivation of Romeo and Juliet. It's a fantastic story. You know, Little Mermaid was a derivation of a fairy tale. It's a great story. So try to keep, I think that's, there's one book I've read and another last one I'll recommend, but I think it's called The War of Art. And one of the things he says is you have something in your head that's resistance. And that resistance will come up with any possible excuse for you not to write. It'll be you need to do the dishes. It'll be that's derivative. There's that voice, that resistance, and that's a real thing. And I see it all the time. It'll sometimes tell me, you should just work on your regular work. Don't work on your fiction writing. You got a lot of work to do. But you have to fight that voice every day. And so sometimes that voice in your head isn't valid. And you know what? Even if you write derivatively, Benjamin Franklin, who was one of our great scholars, founding fathers, one of the ways he practiced writing was actually to take prose and turn it into poetry and take poetry and turn it into prose. He would sort of like translate it. Nothing more derivative than that. But that was how he honed his skills. So even if you're doing it derivatively, it's far better than doing nothing at all, is what I would say.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, my name's Renata. Nice to meet you. Hi, I'm like you, I'm a writer too. I write children's stories, and actually my interest in writing inspired me to go to law school. So I kind of found out about intellectual property, and I do a lot of writing and adaptation. So I look at the value of writing derivative works, and something that I've written in my past that I'm still trying to figure out how to get out to the public, because I'm still kind of going through the edits and everything, and is writing intercultural adaptations to diversify children's literature. And so that's one of my passions. And I was wondering if you have any advice for figuring out when is the right time to submit work, because I keep going back through my own writing, and I'm like I think I'm maybe overly critical, and I don't know when have I finished enough edits and revisions to feel comfortable sharing my stories or work with a public audience.
Great question, Renata. And I have to say, I haven't hit that point yet, although I am submitting a short story right now to my group for submission in their anthology that's going to be published. And they will give me the edits I need for sure, because they are happy to give criticism. I would say, Renata, it sounds to me like if you've gone through that many edits, you either need to join a writer's group that will give you feedback, some objective feedback, or you need to just start submitting it and seeing what you get from publishers or editors. And the reason I say that is because it sounds like it's that perfectionism that's creating the resistance. And I have that a lot. Why didn't I submit anything for 20 plus years? Because I was afraid that it wasn't good enough. But what you find is if you don't submit it, you won't get that feedback that you really need. Either it's good enough, in which case you don't need the feedback, or it's not, in which case you need to hear what they have to say. So it may be a process, and it's a tough one. I really hate being not good at anything or not being perfect, but I'm learning. One of the books that I've read about neuroplasticity, the theory in it is that only when things are hard are you learning. So only when things are hard and when you don't feel good at it, that's the time your brain is grooving new neurological pathways. When things are easy, yeah, you might be smoothing out existing neurological pathways, but you're not really learning the same way. So the submission process for you may be your next big learning. It may be, how do I submit who do I submit to, and then getting through that process. That might be your next big learning. And I love the idea of children's books. I had an idea for a children's book that I'm actually kind of working on half, but forgot about for a little while because I got distracted with something else with my ADD issues that I have. But I had a book called, it's going to be called Americans Come in All Colors. And it's going to be about Americans, all shapes and colors, Americans, both disabled and of all colors, heritages, cultures, but ones you haven't heard of before. So like the first cadet from West Point, the first Black cadet from West Point, or, you know, the Vietnamese, I think was she Chinese American or Vietnamese American architect who was the one who created the Vietnam Memorial. I think she might have been Chinese. I think I said Vietnamese because she designed the Vietnam Memorial in DC. But people that you've never heard of before, and then also, like I said, people with disabilities, women, you know, just everybody. So I had an idea for a book like that, but have not gotten through it. So I'm gonna keep your idea in mind and push myself to get that out there, because I think I've heard there's a big market, I think, for that sort of thing, taking it and then making it applicable to everybody. So yeah, you know, proud of you that you've gone through it and that you've done the editing, because I will be honest, I really have trouble self-editing on my own fiction work. It is tough.
Mm-hmm. But I find it's harder to at least edit my, I find it much easier to edit my writing for law school. I'm a law student right now, than editing my own fiction work. And I've gone back and forth with my research mentor from undergrad in the humanities, and it's like I don't know, it's difficult because I think with fiction, it's a lot easier. It's really about creative stylistic choices rather than in law. It can be that, but usually sometimes it's like, this is just cut all of this. This is not necessary, but you could leave it in fiction. So I feel like there's just more rules, I guess, in legal writing than fiction.
Absolutely. Well, in legal writing, I do often point my new writers back to IRAC, because surprisingly, a lot of them come out of it. I'm like, get back to, let's start with IRAC. But I find the same thing. For me, my legal writing, I can go through and I'm very unemotional and just cut this, cut that, move this around. But my own writing, there's an emotional element. So it's a lot harder to edit. I will say for anyone doing fiction writing or anything like that, or article writing or anything, find some accountability partners. So this is what's getting me going on my novel writing right now. My writing group is serious accountability partners. If I don't get my stuff done, I feel like I'm wasting my time. I'm wasting their time. It is forcing me to really do the things I don't like doing in the writing process. You know, I like the fun part of starting and excitement about a new idea, and then halfway through dumping that and then going to my next new great idea. That's how I like to work. But the accountability partners, you can't do anything alone. And that's almost true in law writing. It's hard to be great on your own.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Lisa.
Hey, how are you?
Thank you so much. I learned so much from this meeting, but I have this question about online post or online posting. You know, I had a fear, you know, I know, like, I joined LinkedIn and I really love the positive vibe on this platform, and I learned so much from your posts and all the great people I followed. And some people even ask me, when are you going to post your own content? So I also had this fear, like, because in the past I did that, like on Twitter or Facebook, I post randomly, like not maybe once every 3 months when I have the urge, but I always have that fear, like if I expose myself too much, and I have to hide somewhere for a while until I have another urge to post again. So I don't know if you have that feeling or not, or if you have any suggestions, like how to overcome.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I've got to say, I started really posting on LinkedIn in February, mostly because I was really passionate about the idea that being a parent is a great, if you're a passionate parent, that gives you some great translatable skills into law. And I think it does. Flexibility, adaptation, grit, all being a parent has really improved me as a lawyer, like any passion that you put a lot of energy into. But I had the same thing as you, where if I had a post that didn't have comments, sometimes I'd be like, oh, I posted one, I remember, and I was like, oh my gosh, that was so cheesy later. And one guy even said that, who's really honest, he's like, oh, that's a little over the top cheesy. I was like, But how I got past that was because when I post every day, it's kind of like the one from the day before it gets wiped away. And Alex Sue had some really good advice. He goes, some of my posts don't get a lot of traction. He's like, you're going to see the ones that get a lot of traction, but he's like, you kind of have to let that go. And then in terms of fear of being yourself, one thing I might suggest you do, and I did this a lot in the beginning, was I would repost other people's stuff that I thought was good with a little comment by myself. And that's one way to sort of start getting out there. It's like getting in the baby steps to say, oh, I like I posted one of Alex's and then I just put like a sentence above it. And a lot of people really like that, but that's a way to get out there without just jumping in the pool, which is not my strength. Although I'm trying to do that more because I've realized sometimes jumping in the pool is a little easier, but my tendency is to like a cold pool, first your toe, then up to your knee. And then, so yeah, if you want to do that approach, I would repost other people's stuff. Or maybe quotes. I would take, sometimes I see great quotes. I posted one the other day that was, I thought, a fantastic quote about salt water being healing. And, you know, that's an easy way. Then you're not really putting yourself out there the same way. So you get comfortable. Like wearing water wings. I've done it. Yeah, it's fine.
Lisa, I you have your hand up. Did you want to ask a question?
Lisa, I have a question for you about like what your process looks like. If you could talk about that, just as far as like when do you schedule time to write? When are you writing? How do you stay consistent with it to create like a finished product?
That is a good question, Olivia, and I might be going to you for coaching on that because that is not my strength. My process in terms of like, I can drop a habit like that. Like I'm really good at just not. So one of the things, like I said, joining the accountability partners has been key for me. I actually think writing in the morning I'm better at. So I'm trying to start getting up and doing just a little bit of writing and not making it a big thing where I have to write like hours. Just if I can even get one handwritten page. I'm starting to, I think, go back to handwriting because when you handwrite, there's something about it that changes the way you write. So particularly for fiction writing, I think it gives you the time to write. But my brain is so all over the place. So sometimes I'll be really inspired and I can type it. And then sometimes I'm like writing slowly. But I will say that book, The War of Art, one of the things he said was sometimes you write badly. So he said, when you're scheduled time, you write and you write badly if you have to write badly. And I certainly, the last chapter I wrote for my book, I wrote a chapter 3 that I was going to add in the middle. And I sent it to everybody and I kind of thought I wasn't inspired to do it really, to be honest. It was a background chapter, which is not my favorite thing, but somebody said, I want some background on this. So I threw it in there and it got a really good response. So you can't judge when you're writing well sometimes. So you got to just get in there and do it. And then, you know, but I do need for the editing process. So I may be calling you for some coaching, Olivia, because
yeah, for sure.
It's not my strong suit.
I'm playing a lot right now with, and talking a lot about doing the thing you don't feel like doing. And like just asking yourself, how would I feel if I did the thing that I'm avoiding? Right. So like for you, how would I feel if I did the editing? It might be like, I don't know, bothered or bored. I find editing my fiction boring.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, it's boring. And so one of my new topics I'm trying, because I experiment everything on my kid, because you see if you have a kid, you're like, here's all the things I'm doing wrong. And then you'll give him advice and you're like, I don't want to be a hypocrite. So he'll often say to me, I'm bored. And my response to him is always, well, then do something you don't want to do because you're already bored. Double down on it. Do what you don't want to do. Like it's already an unhappy time. And he's like, I don't want to. I'm like, you're already not having fun. Why not get something useful out of it? You know, clean your room or do some homework, do that assignment. Like if you're already in a bad mood, do your least favorite project because we might as well like just go all in on the I'm not having a good time and get something out of it. Save your happy time.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and it's true. It's like, well, what if you just allow yourself to be bored and do the thing anyways and get like the end result? The board won't
just
kill
say,
you.
hey, I'm going to take advantage of this horrible boring time and just clean the cat litter box of my cat that has 3 parasites. Why not? What? Oh no, my son thought I was telling him to clean the cat litter box and he's like, I'm not allowed to do that. I'm like, no, you're not now that the cat has parasites. We will not be. I don't need a child with hookworm and whatever else my cat has. So.
I fostered kittens last year, right about this time actually. And I came home, I was in the middle of a homicide trial and I came home the first night after we started to an office. It was actually in this room because I had to keep them separate from my other cats. And they had parasites and had vomited little worms everywhere. And it's the most disgusting thing I've ever experienced in my adult life.
Yeah.
So I can really relate to you.
At least mine was just a lot of flatulence, but when the vet said, she's like, he has 3 parasites, including one I've never seen in my career, I was like, oh, that's great. But yeah, I shouldn't, I mean, the cat has an amazing, like, audible flatulence, which I've never heard from a cat. I was like, this is weird. Yeah, because he got a bunch of parasites in his belly. So it's good. Pets are a good time. Pets and kids. My house is a house of vomit and a lot of cleaning up of vomit and poop, frankly. So it's a good, yeah, I'm living the dream.
Nice.
Living the dream. So any other questions or any other passions people want to share?
Yes. Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for doing this. It really resonated with me as someone who wants to be an author.
Yeah, I'm waiting. I want to see some of your work now. Now that you've shared that, I'm going to be your accountability partner. I expect to see something.
I actually wrote a short story prior to LinkedIn. I was going to submit to a writing contest, but all this networking stuff with my internship, it kind of derailed all of that. And I've been actually focusing on writing articles, and I actually started working on my second article for the internship. And I kind of feel like it's kind of like hack work, like what you're saying, oh, it's a derivative. And I feel like, oh no, like I'm being kind of unoriginal here. Like this is too much. I'm going too far in a few places. Like do you ever feel that way? Like you feel like your writing is like, how can you top the thing you've done before, and how can you sustain? How do you overcome that?
If you write one really good thing, and I read your first article, it was great. I love the analogy with the secret. I mean, I was like, he is a science fiction fantasy writer. I can tell by his analogical thinking. But it is hard. And I wrote one short story in my early 20s that I felt like was the best thing I've written and could ever write. I kind of have had trouble since then. It was a certain level of emotion. And the trick is you just got to write crappy stuff. I mean, it's kind of like your legal work. You're going to write a lot of stuff you're not passionate about. If I'm writing on some tax topic, I can tell you I have no passion for that. I am just writing, and my only motivation is fear of being wrong. And so I will research and write, but you're going to write a lot of stuff in your life you're not passionate about. And that's as important as the stuff you're passionate about, frankly. To be able to do that is something you'll have to learn. So yeah, that's the boring time. You just grit through it and know that some of your stuff is going to be 70 or 80%. And part of the learning process is being willing to put it out there, knowing it's not perfect, not as good as you might like. That's almost more important than having talent, frankly. That is the grit that I am seeking so desperately. It's like the fountain of youth. If I can find the fountain of grit, what I could accomplish.
Thank you, Lisa. Can I ask another question, Angie?
Yeah, go ahead, as long as nobody else is asking.
So, I was wondering who is that professional writer in your writing group?
Jim Rollins is his name. He's written, it's called the Sigma Force series. Sigma Force. I've just started reading him because I've read a lot, but yeah, like I said, he's great and just very genuine. And it's funny, he submits his stuff to us to read for comments as well. So it's been great in that regard. And actually reading his stuff has helped inspire me. So reading good stuff, that's the other thing with an accountability group, reading other people's stuff, whether it's good or bad, sort of either helps you see the good stuff so reading some of his chapters, I was like, oh, I had one chapter where the character, his brother destroys like his working space. And I was like, no, his brother needs to smash his hand and cripple him. That's what, after I read this other guy's writing, I was like, oh, destroying his gardening space, that's pretty Mickey Mouse. Let's get in there and really make this character suffer. So yeah, surround yourself with people doing the kind of read good writers. That will help you. And the frustrating part is you won't be as good as them, and that's hard, but it will inspire you and make you better.
Okay. My problem is though, like my friends, they're not really big readers, only like 1 or 2 of them are. So I only get good feedback from a few of them, and I'm trying to find a writing group.
You find a writing group. Yeah, absolutely. And that was a mistake I made for years. I didn't find a writing group. I kind of went by friends or family and who would read it sort of like, okay, I'll read your stuff, whatever. But no, you really need a writers group. And the people in the writers group are people I didn't know before I joined the writers group. I had just met one of them. So I would look for a writers group in your area or, one online.
Gotcha. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, I had one more, just kind of a general question that anyone can chime in on. But I was curious if certain areas or sectors of the legal field are more friendly to like generalists or general work. and if more or certain areas of the law are more kind of like you have to be like a specialist, or at least when you're doing a certain type of work?
Well, I'll speak on that first, and then everyone else can chime in as well, because I definitely don't have as diversity of experience as some people have. I would say in-house counsel, general counsel tends to be pretty, like you do a broad range of things. So that's a good area to go in. Some areas are really tough. Tax law, you got to be really specialized. Patent law, that sort of thing. Does anyone else have any ideas on what good areas are if you want to be more of a generalist? Maybe working for a small firm sometimes can be good if you're working for a general practitioner.
Okay.
Angie, do you have any thoughts?
I mean, I think if you like kind of playing around in lots of different areas of law, being a judicial clerk too, you get a lot of experience in lots of different areas. You're seeing a lot of litigation. You're getting a lot of experience just watching good lawyering, bad lawyering, and you're usually writing opinions about all sorts of different areas. I mean, I interned for a state court judge in my between my first year and second year of law school, and it was fascinating to see all the different types of law that he has to deal with every day. So I think that gives you a lot of exposure if you want to be more general.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Angie. That's what my husband always said. Actually, he said, my job, he goes, he says, your job is the best for just doing purely legal issues other than being a judge or being a clerk for a judge. So that's a great way to learn different areas, because judges do pretty much everything if you're not in like a specialized like probate or bankruptcy or something.
Yeah, especially if you clerk for a federal judge. Oh my gosh, they see so many different types of areas. So
yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? All right, well, I think, we're almost just about at 1. So if you guys have any follow-up questions or anything, feel free to reach out. Lisa, is it okay if they connect with you on LinkedIn?
Absolutely. You can just look at my name. I would put the link, but I'm really bad at it. So just Lisa Goldkuhl. There's, I think, only one of me on there. So that's the advantage of my married name. It's my maiden name was Chang, which there's a lot of, but Goldkuhl, there is not a lot. So yeah, absolutely connect with me. DM me if you have any questions about writing or the law. I'm always happy to talk on subjects I'm interested in. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today, Lisa. I really, really appreciate it, and absolutely great advice. I look forward to seeing more of your content on LinkedIn, and everybody have a wonderful, safe, and happy week. And we have another meetup coming up on Thursday. So if you guys want to hear about how to go to law school for free and run your own firm, and
I wish I'd had that advice, Angie, as I'm paying off my student loans. Why was that class not given 25 years ago? Because you probably
go to law school for free, run your own firm, be debt free by 25. You'll hear the stories of Natalie Alicia Gold, and she did all of those things. And so if you're interested, please stop by on Thursday, and I'll see you all then.